My name is Mike Davis Marks. I spent 36 years in the Royal Navy, mostly as a submariner, which included command of a nuclear-powered submarine, arguably one of the most demanding leadership roles in the world. I've navigated a submarine to the North Pole. I've served in the British Embassy during 9/11, so I've understood what it's like to work in high-pressure, high-stress scenarios. And I think that what is critical in those is remaining calm, thinking clearly, and teamwork, motivating the team are all critical things. Since I left the Navy 13 years ago, I've been focusing on leadership development and culture, and I'm also serving as managing editor of a publication called The Veteran.uk, which gives voice to our veteran community. And my mission now is to amplify the lived experience of veterans, challenge outdated thinking, stereotyping on what we are and what we exploit, and advocate for what veterans, people who have served in the armed forces, can bring to organisations, employers, and society as a whole.
And welcome back once again to the Inquisitor Podcast with me, Marcus Cauchi. Today I've got Mike Davis Marks as my guest. Mike has spent more than 30 years in the Navy. He's spent 13 years in civilian life, and he is an advocate for veterans and their transferable skills and what they bring to the party in business. Now, many people carry bias, which may or may not be fair, but today what we're trying to do is dispel it and also to explore decision-making in difficult times. What we know from history is that people tend to make very bad decisions when they are under constant stress, under constant forced, unwanted, undesired change, and when it's coming at them thick and fast. And given Mike's background, I think he's probably one of the people best positioned to help us understand how to deal with that stress and how not to let it get in the way of the outcome. So without any further ado, Mike, welcome.
Hello, Marcus. I'm pleased to be here. Thank you.
Excellent. Mike, could you give us 30 to 60 seconds on your history in the Navy and what you're doing today?
Well, I thought you summarised it rather well myself, but hello, everyone. I'm Mike Davis Marks. I spent 36 years in the Royal Navy, the majority of which was as a submariner, in other words, underwater. I've navigated a submarine to the North Pole a couple of times. I've had the privilege and honour of commanding a nuclear-powered submarine, which is arguably one of the most demanding leadership roles in the world. And I was serving in the British Embassy during 9/11. So I've had my share of high-pressure environments where critical factors were remaining calm, thinking clearly, and motivating the team. They're all critical things. As you said, I did 36 years, but the last 13 years since I left, I've been looking closely and developing sort of leadership development, leadership culture, training. I've also been banging the drum for veterans through a publication called The Veteran.uk, which gives voices to our veteran community. And my mission now is to amplify the lived experience of veterans, their transferable skills, and what they can bring to organisations, employers, and society as a whole.
Back in 2008, I got involved with the Liquid List, which is or was a network for veterans to find employment and to engage with civilian employers. And at that time, Cameron had fired, I think, 25,000 veterans and just dumped a load of people onto the market, and their transition was horrific. I remember speaking to the person responsible for the security of the London Olympics, and the advice being given to him for resettlement was to take a compliance officer job at one of the insurance companies and work his way up. He was doing a 300 grand a year job, and they were trying to get him to do a 45 grand job, moving from a 90 grand job. Before we go into the details of what veterans can do, can we start with dealing with the mindset of veterans leaving the forces? What is it that they have that they do not realise they have that civilian life desperately needs?
Really good question. I think what they have that they don't realise they have is a huge amount to offer. And by that, I mean a whole range of soft skills, leadership, teamwork, discipline, commitment, that add a lot of fibre to organisations. And also busting. You mentioned earlier about stereotypes and myths. I think so. One of the great stereotypes of military people from people who haven't served is that of either Colonel Blink, an officer, Colonel Blimp, or Shouty Sergeant. And the truth is that 99.9% of the military are not like that at all. On the other side of the fence, most veterans I have met, and I include myself, really don't realise how much they have to offer. They think that they, and I think this all comes down to the way that we're trained, which is we're part of a team. There's no I in team. You're there to support the team, for the team to achieve its objectives, its missions, whatever it's meant to do. You don't put yourself above the team. The team is everything. And so when you leave that environment, and suddenly you are actually trying to put your hand up and say, "This is me," that sort of self-effacing attitude or mindset that you've had for X number of years sort of is still there. I remember in the sort of the year or so before I left the Navy at the end of my time, wondering who on earth would want to employ a former nuclear submarine captain. It's a rather naively, misunderstanding the sort of transferable skills it takes to keep 120 people happy in Cauchi for months on end underwater. So I think they've got an awful lot to offer. I just know that by and large they don't realise it, and our job at the Veteran is to try and highlight what those transferable skills are by writing about what people have achieved since they left, since they served, so that people can say, "Oh, I didn't know you could do that," or "I didn't know that was open to me."
Can we explore what leadership is not in that case? Because I think what you described is good leadership. And in a lot of civilian life, especially where people are driven by quotas, short-term quarterly reporting, all that kind of stuff, people have a tendency to throw good leadership out in pursuit of not getting fired a lot. I'm curious to understand, in your experience, what the gap is between great leadership and average leadership. So tell me what isn't great.
I think it's a fantastic question, and actually, we could do 10 podcasts on this. It's so much.
Well, we may well do.
So I'm a passionate advocate that leadership is not about telling people what to do, which is what a lot of people think it is. I think leadership is much more about motivating, inspiring people, and helping them become better versions themselves. I'm an advocate of it's a relatively new term called servant leadership, which is the leader is there to serve the people that are subordinate to him or her. So my job as a leader is to engage, delegate, and help everybody that's under my charge realize their full potential. In fact, the word charge is a really good one, because I say leadership is not about being in charge, it's about looking after the people in your charge. And I think that's really important. I think leadership is about bringing people with you, helping them become better. And the best leaders are the ones that make themselves redundant, because the people who are subordinate to them are able to do everything that the leader can do and potentially more.
So this then brings us to the critical question. When leaders spend their time doing, they are stealing the opportunity for their people to grow and develop.
100%.
And every time they answer a question, instead of asking a question, have the person work it out, they steal another learning opportunity, which means that they're probably going to have to do it over and over again. So can we just put a nail in the coffin of the difference between delegation and abdication?
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with what you just said. I think every time you tell someone the answer, you deny a learning opportunity. So actually, it's really important for people to, have a go themselves. And one of the rules I had when I was in command of my submarine was, "Don't bring me problems, bring me solutions." And I didn't mean that in a nasty way. I mean, I want to know what you think you can do about that. And invariably, unless the solution that was brought was palpably wrong or dangerous, I would allow them to give it a go. Now let's see how that runs. Because if it wasn't right, there might be some learning. There might be some learning from it. You always learn from your mistakes. And if it was right, then they would feel more empowered, because they've been allowed to try what they thought was the right way to do things. And it's important, even if it goes wrong, is not to sort of prod a finger and say you got that wrong. It's much more important to say, right, what did we learn from that? How would you do that differently next time? And therefore, you bring people with you, and you allow them to teach themselves through a safe environment. So I think that's really important.
So that then comes to what it takes to be the kind of leader that can trust your people and then not punish them for getting it wrong. What are the conditions you have to create to make that even possible?
You have to start with yourself. So self-awareness, emotional intelligence, empathy, whatever you want to call it, is really important. I would add at this point, because I think there's a debate on this between nature and nurture, which is, are leaders born or can they be trained? And whilst unquestionably there are born leaders, there are people that have natural leadership skills, Horatio Nelson, for instance, um, um, and I'm sure there've been more recent ones than that. I fervently believe that everybody can be taught how to become a good leader, and most would be able to achieve that if only they were given that training and then had the mindset to take it on board. And I offer myself as an example because if you'd have pointed to me in the school photograph as a sixth former at my grammar school, that who's going to command the nuclear submarine, I doubt if anyone would have pointed at me. I doubt if anyone would have said, MDM, that he's going to be. I was a pretty undistinguished, unprepossessing schoolboy, and but I joined an organisation that had all the right culture for helping me become a leader through its training processes and over a period of time, and having commanding officers that allowed me to make mistakes in a safe environment taught me how to do it myself. I think you have to start with yourself. The question you asked is, where do you begin? And I think you need to understand yourself. A degree of self-awareness is important. How you do that is up to you, but having a critical friend, is quite important. Someone that tells you when you're not doing it right and how you're coming across. Even when I was in command, I asked my second in command to let me know when he thought I was doing something that was not right or coming across wrong. I didn't ask him to do it in the glare of everybody else in front of sailors, because that wouldn't have been helpful to him or me. But I did say, look, if you think I'm an idiot on this, I want you to tell me that in respectful terms, in the privacy of my house. Like that. So I've set some safeguards to make sure that I wasn't projecting something that wasn't what I wanted to project.
Well, I'm going to dispute one thing. I don't believe Horatio Nelson popped out of his mother's womb able to lead. And everybody is a creature of their context and their background. And some people will have an aptitude for it, but I think it's 95% nurture. And you may have a predisposition against it, but it can be learned. I work with people all the time who, if they find a process that allows them to operate within their scope of capability, and they have a clear way of doing things, and someone to help them, then most people can learn to do pretty much anything that they have to do in business. It's not like it's that complicated. We do tend to overcomplicate things, but in principle, I absolutely agree with you 100%. The question now is, after you've got self-awareness and you've mastered to some degree your own inner demons, your tendency to have blind spots, to be brittle, then you need to develop relationship mastery. And this is where the EQ comes in, because self-awareness is understanding how you land with others as much as being aware of what's going on inside you. So that next stage, how do you develop really good EQ and not use it as a weapon or a tactic?
I mean, I'd never heard of the term EQ or EI, emotional intelligence, until halfway through my naval career. But I guess that the training organisations that I was put through as I sort of went through my naval career had that sort of built in. So I learned it by osmosis rather than, okay, here's 101 on what emotional intelligence is all about.
So you learned by doing.
Yeah, and so day one so I left school at 18. I ran away to sea. I say that it sounds romantic. I joined the Navy with the full approval of my surprise parents. Surprised because they had no idea where this idea of joining the Navy came from. Well, I don't come from a family. If I don't come from a military family, we didn't live near a naval base, and I don't think we watched the Sink the Bismarck on TV the night before I said I want to join the Navy. But so they were surprised, but I think pleased that I opted this route. And when I got to this beautiful building down in Dartmouth, Devon, called the Britannia Royal Naval College, where they train junior officers, they started putting us through practical leadership tasks. Here's a bunch of young officers, cadets, go and build a bridge over this river without getting anyone wet and get the team there. And so we would all be appointed in turn to lead a task like that. And then our fellow cadets would then critique how it was done and what we did right and what we did wrong, but particularly on the leadership aspect. Why did you select the people to do those tasks? What did you do to make? How did they feel about giving those tasks? So right from the early days, there was feedback. So feedback is a really important mechanism, and being open to feedback. So the self-awareness bit is also knowing that you're not perfect. In fact, none of us are perfect, and so once you realise you're not perfect, then and you open your mind to constructive criticism or feedback, you can then start to improve on all aspects, including emotional intelligence and EQ. How did you get these people to do that and do it willingly rather than because you just told them to do it? So I think, and throughout my naval career, and I think the Navy's brilliant at this. Every posting I had was preceded by some training, which took that to the next level. Okay, you're going to be given more responsibility here. There's going to be more people that if something goes wrong, it's going to have more impact. Therefore, we're going to give you an extra layer of training that not only gives you the subject matter expertise to know what it is, but also the people management expertise so that you manage the burden of greater people. So, and one thing actually in your intro to this about bad decision comes from stress. Yes, it can do if you're not trained to deal with it, but if you get the right training that allows you to build up resilience to stressful, high pressure environments, you're then in a much better position to be able to make the right decisions, or rather allow the team to make the right decisions, because we all think about leader as the person at the top, and actually everybody is in this, and there's always going to be somebody in the pyramid that actually knows more about something than you do, and leadership is about allowing them to express that expertise to the betterment of everybody, the team, and not be frightened to speak up and say, I think we should be doing it this way. So yeah, training.
Well, the training is critical, and the fact that you're doing training over and over again, so you're not just doing it once, you do it until it becomes muscle memory and it becomes habit, so that they don't have to think about the decision. If I look at the practice labs that we run, it's the repetition and trying something from a different angle each time, and trying the different nuances that builds robustness and resilience and anti-fragility into the process. I'm really curious, how often were you changing your standard operating procedures on the basis of iterative improvement as you learnt as a submarine?
All the time, because I think you can't stand still.
Say that again, just so that the audience hears it.
All the time.
All the time. How often is that? Every bloody day.
Well, I have this phrase: every day's a school day. So if you're not learning something on a daily basis, irrespective of what you're doing and who you are, then you're not developing as a human being. Have you heard of a concept? I'm sure because you're a wise inquisitor, Marcus. But have you heard of a concept called the staircase of learning?
Yes.
Unconscious competence or or conscious competence, and this idea that you start off with you don't know what you don't know. We all start off there. Yeah, you're right. Horatio Nelson came out of his mother's womb not knowing anything, but he learned very quickly. His staircase was very steep. He was commanding a ship at 23. I mean, extraordinary individual. Wow. Please, readers, go and find a biography of Nelson. Most extraordinary, greatest British leader, military leader of all time, in my humble opinion. But you don't know what you don't know, and then when you do know, so that first time you get given the keys of a car to go and learn to drive a car. When you're sitting in the back seat with your parents driving, you think, how difficult is that?
Anyone can do it.
They can do it. And that's a classic. You don't know what you don't know. And then when you put the keys in the car, when you've got your driving instructor and your first ever lesson, and he goes through, and this is what we're doing. Turn on the engine. Tells you to put it into first gear and do the pedal with the clutch and the accelerator. What invariably happens? What happened when you did it, Marcus? Do you remember your first ever the first moments of your driving lesson?
Yeah, it wasn't pretty, and there were quite a few stalls.
You stalled. I mean, and at the moment you do your first stall, the moment you do your first, where that jugga, you haven't got it right. You suddenly realise you go from I don't know to I now know I don't know. So that's conscious incompetent. I know I'm incompetent rather than I don't know I'm incompetent. And then you have this whole training lessons. You put yourself through different scenarios and situations, where actually you are at some stage ready to take the test. So you actually know what you know what you can do. You know what your level of competence is, which is known as conscious competence. And you sit, you're driving. There's a lot of concentration. You're focusing, mirror signal maneuver, all that sort of stuff. You pass your test, and then 6 months later, you've got one arm on the steering wheel, one arm on the window, and you've gone into unconscious competence. In other words, it's become second nature.
Yeah.
And I love that. But the critical bit of it is that you've got to train people in order to get from they don't know what they don't know to conscious competence. They know they're competent, and then beyond into second nature. It's that training and repetition of training, as you say, every day is a school day. That gives you that resilience to be able to withstand stress and pressure and respond to different situations.
So, in order to bring all these threads together, I think it's really important to also ask the question: how much of your job as the CO was doing the work?
Early days, quite a lot. As I got to understand my team better, less. As my team demonstrated to me their willingness to take on more tasks and burdens, less. And I discovered the ability to delegate, not abdicate, to competent people who could do the job as well as I could, allowed several things to happen. One was their progression, their progression of their developing them as individuals so that they could take on more responsibility. Also, your ability not to get bogged down in the detail, so you were able to stand back and have a sort of wider view of what was going on, so you could spot when things weren't going right, unencumbered by the minutiae of and I think it's a common, I've seen this, a common mistake that actually when the person in command is probably best at doing everything, and there are individuals, I'm not, but there are individuals that are like that. There's a tendency to try and do everyone's job, but that diminishes their ability to learn. And even if they've got the brain side of the planet, it still ties you down so that you can't stand back and you have that wider, more strategic view.
And you become a bottleneck.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and a single point of failure.
And a single point of failure. Absolutely. Great catch. So this is really where I think a major shift has to happen in leadership, where we move from the idea that people work for us and that instead we serve them. So servant leadership, 100% with that. In order to do that, you have to be able to give trust. For someone to reach that position without naively then endangering the rest of the lives of all your submariners, what are the conditions that you need to attain in terms of your relationship with your reports, in order to be able to give trust and do so knowing that it's not going to be fatal?
Well, you start off by assigning missions of low risk and impact, and allow people to get on with that, knowing that actually even they make a pig's ear of it, it's not going to matter that much. And actually, the idea is that they don't make a pig's ear of it. The idea is that they succeed. So you're not there to trip them up. You're there to help them. And I think even if you say, "Give me solutions and not problems," you still need to be open to saying, "Well, have you thought about this and have you thought about that?" So being a mentor and a coach, so that people are just gently nudged in the right way. So it's kind of subtle science of helping people, go down the right path without sort of firmly taking them by the hand and leading them. It's more a sort of gentle little nudge. And if they're going down the right path, then encouragement and positive feedback. I mean, I've used the term feedback before. Feedback is so important.
Critical. Well, what you've just described actually is a situation where you've got people who want to grow, who want to develop, and if they don't grow and develop because you're getting in the way, that then creates resentment. In your early days commanding, what did you notice that made you realize that actually I'm the problem?
By having those feedback mechanisms already set up, so that even in the early days, you had someone. I mean, no, you don't sort of walk into a submarine and know nobody. They're always going to be. Such is the nature of the submarine service. In my case, 3,000 people, that you're going to know a deal of people. In fact, my second command I'd served with once before and known him, socially, for several years before that. So I knew my second command quite well. He wasn't an unknown quantity, and I knew that I could trust him to say, "Sir, you're getting this wrong in the right way." Even on day one, even on day two, and of course you don't become a commanding officer overnight. There's this process. My first job was as a torpedo officer in a diesel electric submarine. You're expected to make mistakes, and you learn, and your learning curve is very strong. But by the time you've gone through all of those different roles, second command, where you're actually shadowing the commanding officer for much of the time, it's kind of training for the role that you're about to be. So day one, walk on board a submarine. I'm your new commanding officer. Isn't day one of the experience of doing this? You've had many opportunities to build all the layers necessary to say, this is how I'm going to command. This is the way I want people to respond to me, and this is how I'm going to help bring them with me and bring them on. Just an aside, there's a really good book written by a chap called David Marquette called "Turn the Ship Around," and I don't know if you've read it or heard of it.
I've heard of it. I haven't read it yet.
So just very briefly, he's a US submariner. Was going to command a submarine in the US submarine force. Knew a year before that he was going to be assigned to HMS. Can't remember the name. I think it was Santa Fe. Might have been Olympia. And he was almost OCD in wanting to be the best, most knowledgeable person on every aspect of how that submarine operated, so that nobody knew. He wanted to walk on board that nobody knew more about it than he did. And a week before he was due to command, he'd been doing this for a year, preparation for it. Commanding officer of another submarine broke a leg in a skiing accident. And it was a different class. It was still a nuclear powered submarine, but it was a different class, a different system, an old one. And he got rung up by his appointing system, saying, "You're not going to USS Olympia, you're going to USS Santa Fe." I don't know if those are the names of the actual submarines, but they're different class of submarines. And he said, I don't know anything about the Santa Fe. I'm the expert on USS Olympia. And the US, the Admiralty said, "Hard luck, chum. That's where you're going. You don't have any. She's got important roles to do. We need you on board." So after a couple more protestations, he duly reported on board. He realised that he stepped over the gangplank, that he was not the most knowledgeable person on board, like he expected to be in the submarine he was meant to go to. He was probably one of the least knowledgeable. And what was really clever was not he realised that he had the emotional intelligence to understand that actually he had to rely on his team. So he gathered his head of departments and said, "You all know the submarine so much better than me that I'm going to allow you to command the submarine with me in a sort of observational veto role. So I want you to tell me what you're doing, but I don't want you to ask to do it. I want you to say, I intend to do this. And I will learn from you about how to operate the submarine." And so that went, and actually it was very successful. I mean, they all rose to the challenge. They all did their bit and more. And at the end of about 3-4 months, he called them all in again. He said, "I now understand how this submarine works now, thanks to the way you are." But he also realised that it was operating better than he could have ever imagined. He said, "I'm going to take a chance. I'm going to continue now that I'm, up to speed. I want you to continue to run the submarine as if you let me know what you're doing. I want to know what's going on. I want to learn, continue to learn. But actually, it's still going to be, I intend to, not please may I have permission to." And he operated it throughout his. His submarine went from one of the how they rank these things, but the least performing submarine in all sorts of different the way they sort of judge these things, to the most outstanding sub, and they won cups and competitions for being the most efficient submarine for this, the best submarine for doing that, and it was all because he let go of the reins of power and allowed his team to get on with it and do their best. He also ensured that it wasn't heads of departments just being like that. They filtered that culture downwards, so it was a whole boat culture. And he's written a book about it, and it's really good.
Was he the one who decided on his first day he was going to stand at the back of the queue, and the ratings were telling him to go to the front? He said, "No, officers queue like everyone else."
No, I don't think that was him. I think you're thinking of Simon Sinek,
right.
Who is a leadership guru you've probably heard of, and he wrote a book called "Leaders Eat Last." So I think I think it comes from that book, "Leaders Eat Last." And you're right; you should always look after the people that rely on you. They should always be served first.
So this then comes to another critical question, which is succession. The root word of succession is success, and It depends on empowering your people to be successful in their role so that you can execute the outcome for which you've been hired. Your job is not to do the work. Your job is to create the conditions so the people can do the work excellently to the standard intended and not have to do stupid things or workarounds or feel threatened in their role so that they can do their best work. For that to be possible, what needs to shift in the leader's mindset so that they can stay completely out of the way? And what are the habits that they will demonstrate that make it possible for them to get the information they need to be able to do that?
The situation you just described could have been out of one of my leadership development presentations. It was absolutely spot on in terms of how you want people to succeed. And how you go about it is all about mindset. So again, it starts with self-awareness and understanding you and how you react to certain situations and your impact on other people. But if you understand the core of what you've just said is understanding that in order to help people succeed, you need to allow them to express themselves and do things, not do the doing for them. I think if you understand that from the get-go, then you will. I can remember, sitting on my hands a couple of times, thinking in the early days, thinking, should I get involved? Should I get involved? No, I won't, because I want them to learn from this, and I want, and actually, sometimes not only do they learn, but they do it really well, potentially better than you could have done it. I've never ever thought that I was the best person on board to do anything better than somebody else on board. There was always somebody better than me that could do something. And I think realization of that, and then trying to work out a way to utilize that, which helps them and helps you, is to everybody's advantage. So it's mindset, isn't it?
Well, you've just put the final pillar in place, really, which is that you start with self-mastery, then you move to relationship mastery, and only then, once you've got those two lined up, are you fit to master role. Because role function is, role performance is a function of how well you respond in context and within the system. And the problem is that most people that I come across who are struggling are treating everything as if they're an individual contributor. They're not part of a machine. They don't see themselves as part of a team. And that is really dangerous in this kind of economy. Yeah. So what do we do about that?
Well, how do you boil the ocean dry? I think one of the starkest differences to me being in the military to leaping into civilian life was the realization that most people didn't think like the way we do in the military in terms of team. It's the team that's important. It's working out where the strengths and weaknesses of a team and making sure that you cover the bases. I'm mixing lots of metaphors here just to test your audience. And I'm hugely disappointed that to go back into environments all over the place where it was a toxic leadership culture because the leader knew best. And I'm afraid to say, I think that's prevalent everywhere. If you've got a brass plaque on your door that says director or whatever, it seems to imbue them with a sense that they know better.
Dunning-Kruger effect?
Sorry?
The Dunning-Kruger effect?
Yeah, exactly. So this goes back to, I think that veterans. So we've got 2.2, according to the 2021 census, 2.2 million veterans in the UK.
Really?
Yeah, I mean it's more than you think. Of which about 1 million are of working age. There are, and define working age, or not really. You can be working age. You can leave the services at 20, and you can be working way beyond 65, 60, 67. So I'm not going to define what working age is. We're willing to get involved in the world of work, whether it's paid for or not, voluntary. And I think that the mindset that we get drummed into us which we've been talking about for this last half hour, is incredibly useful if we could get more veterans into organisations with that mindset, trying to spread the word that this is a better way, a better culture for organisations to grow. And there are some companies better than others. I mean, John Lewis, partnership, and I'm not I'm not trying to get any vouchers off them or anything, but I'll give you an address if they want to send some. John Lewis, but everyone's a partner; they're not employees. You go into a John Lewis store and they know they own a tiny bit of the store, because they're partners, not employees. And that mindset is that I think you get great customer service by and large. I'm sure there are people who haven't, but by and large you get great customer service because they're all part of a bigger team. This is our store. I think there needs. I'm not saying the John Lewis partnership model is right for everything, but I think that sense of bringing people with you, a sense of ownership of what their brand company does and things like that, is what leaders should be doing. Is giving them that John Lewis partnership effect, which we would recognise in the military as being quite effective.
Well, this then brings us to defining the roles. I think leadership has 4 principal functions. Now, within the Navy, I suspect your recruitment is somewhat defined by the service, but finding and hiring the right people to your team, then creating the conditions for them to do their best work. Third one is prevent actions, interference from and acts of idiocy from above, especially from you. And then the fourth one is to empower your people to make good decisions well. And everything that you've described so far seems to satisfy all 4, 3 of the 4 criteria. But you seem to have an ability as veterans or as the military to be able to take really rough raw material and very often turn them into incredibly effective individuals, as well as part of a team. I look at the military with awe sometimes because of the ability to draw out of people their very best. How is that possible, or is that a condition of the vocational nature?
I don't think people think vocationally anymore. I think Gen Z and the millennials aren't looking for a career for life. I think I joined the Navy at 18 thinking that I would be buried at sea. I nearly was once. I mean, I think that the point is that actually the idea of vacation is becoming less fashionable and people seeing, job switching more common. But I think my philosophy was I joined the Navy at 18 and I would leave if I stopped enjoying it. And 36 years later, I hadn't stopped enjoying any of it. So I was very lucky. And I think we want to create. How did the military do it? It's always surprised me that we can take almost any material and turn it into extremely resilient, well-rounded, forward-facing individuals that are capable of taking on things that maybe their school teachers of 5 years ago wouldn't have thought possible. But I think it goes back to training and teamwork, training that's built around building teams. You're not letting when you do something in the military, you don't generally do it for the king or the queen, as was, or indeed your country. You're doing it for your mates, your team, and I think that level of fostering good teams and making everyone feel valued and important within that team is the building block of all of this. And if we want to, help, make society, I don't know what I mean by make society better, more resilient. Then we need the building blocks of teams. We build, encourage people to help each other, look out for others, and work together as teams, because I think that's the building blocks of all of this in terms of turning this raw material into. And this raw material joins, it doesn't just join the military, it joins everywhere. So what is it the military does that's different? I think the word team is really important here as a building block in all of that process.
Okay, so many employers will have a bias that veterans are going to be robots, they're going to not be able to think creatively. Can we just put a nail in that coffin too?
Yeah, that goes back to my stereotypes, and Shabby Sergeant and Colonel Blimp. And I think that my experience is that it's the opposite of that. I mean, one of the military mottos is a plan doesn't survive first contact with the enemy.
I teach all my clients that.
Yeah, so you have to be able to think on your feet. The situation changes. You've got to have saying the situation changes. How do I now deal? What's happened has happened. What do we do? What do we do looking forward? So what do we do need now to make the next tomorrow better? So understanding that situation, so agility of thought and not being stuck up, we're going to do it this way, even though the situation has changed, is really part of military mindset, and it's drummed into through all of those different training, processes that we talked about earlier. So I think those employers that have military and trust them to, in relatively senior positions, allow them to get on with doing it, will understand that they aren't the stereotypes of, do everything by a rote card, but have the ability to think on their feet and be agile when the situation changes. Interesting enough, I've been involved with a small organisation called Crisis Boardroom, which is all about helping people react in a crisis, and it's based on, we put people into scenarios that they are going to be uncomfortable with and help them think their way through it. And it's only by doing that over, by repeating it and changing the scenarios, that we get the ability to think under pressure, but also not get stuck in one way of doing things, because there's always more than one way of doing it. So again, I think it's the training that is the reason why we're able to think on our feet, and I can remember at Dartmouth. So I told you I commanded a submarine. In order to command a submarine, you have to do this course called Perisher, the submarine command course, and it is quite a high pressure course. It's allegedly one of the highest mental pressure courses in the armed forces, and you don't really want any person off the street commanding a nuclear submarine. You want to depend on that the person in command of a submarine is capable of reacting under extreme pressure, and that's what Perisher is designed to see, how you react under extreme pressure. So you might be going to do an intelligence gathering mission, off the coast of wherever, and this is all simulated, of course. I mean, it's in a submarine, but it's the coast is simulated, and you think it's all going swimmingly well, and they'll have instigated a stoker that comes running into the control room. That's the center of the submarine, wielding a spanner, sort of running amok, and designed to, there's a new party to deal with. So again, it comes down to training. We train people to be agile, and I think one of the things that the Veteran, the publication that I'm lucky enough to be managing editor is it explains, over and over again, how people are able to do this, and what they therefore can offer employers and organisations after they leave.
I had a client, Johan, who was ex-Belgian Navy, so he was they're playing on minesweepers. He then came to the UK, and he worked his way up from cleaning tables in Burger King to running the world's largest and busiest restaurant. He then became chief operating officer for another company, and all of that was really down to having the right kind of critical thinking, phenomenal people skills. His interviews, he would create a crisis to see how the interviewee responded to it, and were they kind to people. These little nuances. So getting to in Lean, they talk about going to the Gemba, where you get right down into the thick of it, and you draw a circle around yourself, and you just stand there and observe for 8 hours. That first party data, that getting right down, speaking to the individuals, that seems to have been largely lost. That management by walking around. What would you advise somebody who is brand new to their first leadership role? Because by and large, in civilian life, they are 30 when they get their first management role, and 12 years later is when they get their first training of any real value. So there's 12 years floundering around, flapping, and completely messing things up, and finding it really hard. So on day one, what would you advise a brand new manager to do if they haven't been given a proper runway into the job? Because I'd say 85 to 90%, that's exactly their pathway. They get tapped on the shoulder and told, Mike, bad news, we've just fired your idiot boss. Good news, you're now the idiot boss. Off you go, son.
Another great question from the stable of Marcus. I saw John Cleese had a word for this, and he did a series of videos called Goya.
Yeah.
And you know what Goya stands up, don't you? Get off your ass. And he was used to play the idiot manager that didn't get off his ass. So he was the fool guy.
Yeah.
But the point was that actually day one, you might think I need to look busy. What you need to do is go and listen. You need to go and walk around and ask curious questions. I think you need to go and find out what people do. Go and find out what they like about what they do and what they don't like about what they do. I mean, depends on the size of the organisation, how long this will take. Ask people what they think can be improved. So not necessarily that you take note of it rather than it doesn't mean to say everything that's suggested is right. And just be in absorb mode. I think day one is all about, and probably day 2, day 10, maybe even day 30. I mean, you need to be observant and go and talk to people, find out how things are working. It might be things are working well. I mean, in which case you want to encourage that, but you can also start to see. So get out of your desk, get away from your desk, get out of the office, shut the door, take a notebook, because actually the point about a notebook is it's not it. People think if you take notes that actually you're actually listening to them. So it's not just about using your ears; it's also showing that you're using your ears, and also it's a helpful list of things that you've taken note of, that because you won't remember everything.
The weakest ink is stronger than the strongest memory.
Exactly.
I've forgotten more than I've ever learned because I forgot to write it down. Write the bloody thing down, and there's nothing shameful about writing stuff down, which again is something that I come across where people don't want to appear like they need the crutch. I think humility is one of the most important qualities in leaders, which is desperately lacking too often because they want to be the hero. And if you're wearing your underpants on the outside, you're not a leader. You might be a bully. You might be someone who thinks that you're leading, but what you're doing is you're dragging people by the nose, and you don't have real commitment. What you've got are people who are looking for a way out, mostly.
Yeah, and the other aspect of this, getting out there, going talking to people, asking curious questions, is also making them feel that they're important, making that they belong. So actually, the fact that managing director or the line manager or the boss or whatever it is actually bothered to get out and say, okay, explain to me what you're doing, what's good, what would you like to see different, makes them feel important. Their opinion matters. So I think you're learning about what's going on, and the culture and the mood music, and perhaps some sticky points that you need to deal with. They're thinking he or she's bothering to come and talk to me and find out what my opinion is. That makes me feel I must have something to offer, a value. So it works both ways. Getting out there, and actually, it's not. This isn't something you just do from day one. It's something you should routinely do, because any organisation will have an ingress, exit of people, so that people will be changing. Actually, the most successful companies don't change very much. I think one of the best metrics of how happy a company is staff throughput. And if retention is really high and recruitment is buoyant, everyone wants to join, but they're not, then that's a sure sign that we're getting something right. So I mean, actually, the papers often talk about recruitment problems in the military, and I won't deny that some of the processes which have been civilianized haven't been very helpful. But actually, people leaving the services aren't leaving in droves. If they leave, they don't largely leave because they don't like what they're doing. They leave because they want to spend more time with their family. They want to start a family and something like that. And maybe military life doesn't allow that. But leaving because there was I think it was Ernst & Young did a poll several years ago where they asked 10,000 people why they changed jobs in a year in the UK, and 72% of them said because of they cited their boss as the main reason for leaving.
That research is really interesting, but actually, if you take it a little bit further, the real reason they left was because their boss wouldn't let them do their best work every day. And so they felt diminished or stifled or constrained. And if you're hiring talent, why would you get in the way of them bringing their best self to work? And that's exactly what managers who try to control, manipulate, coerce, bully. The number of times I hear, "Oh, we need to put the pressure on," and I've been asked to come in and be the bad cop. I mean, when has morale ever improved when you beat people?
On no occasion whatsoever
In history, ever.
No, doesn't work.
Doesn't work.
People need to feel valued, not diminished. People need to be given positive reasons to grow, not put into a hole and shut up. I mean, 99% of people want to do well and want to do best, and you need to create. So this is why I come back to the servant leadership model, which I think you and I are both advocates of, which is the aim of a leader is to grow the organisation above them, not tell the pyramid beneath them what to do. I mean, it's so it's creating that environment. Really important.
Excellent. Mike, we're going to have to wrap up now, but before we go, if you had one bit of advice that you could go back in your time capsule and speak to your idiot 23-year-old self, what would you have whispered in his largely arrogant and ignorant ear that he'd probably have ignored but would have benefited from?
I think I would have said to myself, you know much less than you think you know, and you're surrounded by people that can help you. So work on your relationships with other people, so that as a whole you can learn off them, and as a team you can grow together. So and it comes down to people. People are the most important aspect in everything we did. I always have this phrase that commanding a nuclear submarine worth £1.5 billion to build it's just a bit of metal until you put the only ingredient in it that matters, which is people. So the people are the most important asset on any company's spreadsheet. They're not just numbers; they're people. Treat them as people, not as numbers on the spreadsheet. Yeah. And to my 23-year-old self, I wish I had sort of fully put my mind around that then. How important getting people, working together as a team, working on people relationships, helping each other was to the overall success of everything we all did.
Well, again, you've hit the nail on the head, because so often leadership is driven by the numbers on a spreadsheet. Management is driven by the numbers on a spreadsheet. And that takes into account somewhere between 5 and 15% of the overall picture. And if you're only managing off the balance sheet or the spreadsheet, odds are you're managing blind. You've poked out one eye and you've scraped the front of the other one, and you've got a porous eye patch on it, because you cannot possibly run an effective organization if you're just looking through the numbers in the spreadsheet, because human beings don't behave like that. They don't behave logically. The only people who think that human beings behave in a logical, rational manner are economists, and they were put on the planet to make soothsayers look good. So the grim reality is, if you are looking through a single lens, chances are you're missing the bigger picture. And the thing you described that really sticks out to me is the range of experience and the perspective that you develop as a leader going through the apprenticeship in the Navy. And that seems to have been missed in a lot of civilian leadership roles.
Sadly, I think you're right. And go get off your ass. That principle. Go and talk to people. Go make them feel important. Go and understand what their job is about and how they think it could be done better. They know, you don't.
Yeah, absolutely. So on that happy note, Mike, can you recommend a couple of other books for people to read around leadership, self-awareness?
So I mentioned Simon Sinek and leaders. He's got another book called Always Start with Why, the Why, which I would recommend. There's I met Dave Marquardt, Turn the Ship Around, is the other one I was talking about. I mean, you can read lots of books. Actually, at the end of the day, go and talk to somebody that's doing it well, and just absorb all the good stuff. I'm sure you'll post my details on your podcast. I'm always happy to help anybody that wants to have a chat. And
what's the best way to get hold of you? LinkedIn, email, phone?
LinkedIn is always good. I'm fairly prolific on LinkedIn, so that's quite easy. I can share my contact details with you if you want to put them out with me. But
as long as you want to hear from people.
I'm always happy to hear from people.
Excellent. Mike Davis-Marks, thank you.
Marcus, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Excellent. So this is Marcus Cauchi signing off once again from the Inquisitor Podcast. If you found this useful, please get in touch. Comment, like, share. If you think that your boss needs to listen to this, then please share it. And in the meantime, stay safe and happy selling. Bye-bye.